when the Russians intervened in Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, we saw how the Africans who went to study in Ukraine got stranded over there. The Africans were stranded in a land that they know nothing about, stranded in a country that is struggling to find its feet, a country without a soul. Ever since then, the war has been raging on with no signs of an end in sight. You see, this is the thing with African people. They just don't believe in themselves. You see, they go anywhere. They would go anywhere just to find what they left back in Africa. You see, we have been trained that way. We have been trained to see ourselves through the eyes of other people. We train experts, we train doctors, lawyers, engineers, but we still don't believe in our own inherent capacities to transform our people, to teach our people according to our own instruction. That instruction which is critical for the elevation, for the rehabilitation of our, distressed African societies, of our sociologically shattered African societies. And we continue to do these things with impunity. We don't believe in ourselves. The war has been raging over there, and we saw how Africans were crying out for help. We saw how Africans were discriminated when it came to, rescue operations, how people were supposed to flee, and I think the Ukrainian authorities were selecting the Ukrainians, as a priority. The Africans just got stranded over there. The question that I ask is this one: what really took them there? What took the Africans to Ukraine? What did they go to do there? They say they were studying medicine, they were studying engineering in Ukraine. To do what with all those degrees? You see, Walter Rodney put it in a very apt way when he said that the brainwashing of Africans is so stupendous that it has convinced Africans of their inferiority. Yeah. The brainwashing of Africans is so stupendous that it has convinced Africans of their inferiority. These are the words of Walter Rodney. Wonderful words. Walter Rodney was speaking about the domestication of the African. Going to a place where you don't belong, going to a place where you're not welcome, going to a place where you're mistreated under the guise of going there to search for a better future, to get an education. You get discriminated. You see, you get treated with racialized hatred, with passionate hatred. People don't want you there, but they want your money. They give you degrees that you probably would not even be able to use to help the people in Africa. But then Ukraine itself is a country which is so politically embattled. I don't want to speak about the fact that it is a sociologically shattered nation or society. The people of Eastern Ukraine say they don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore. And they've even voted, they've held referendum or referenda. You see, maybe not just one. They've decided that they want to be part of Russia or the Russian Federation. So they don't necessarily see themselves as part of Ukraine anymore because they've been discriminated in Ukraine. Their language, the Russian language in Ukraine has been, undermined. We understand that in Ukraine, the only the lingua franca, or the language that is being used, is Ukrainian. So these discriminatory practices inside the country itself warrants these people to want to leave the country. But these are things that Africans do not understand. Well, the ones that live there probably knew these things. you know. But these are problems that are inherent in the structure of that society, which Africans themselves do not understand, you know. But the Ukrainians have been fighting with themselves, fighting with their own souls, fighting against their own brothers. You see, they invited this fratricidal bloodletting to themselves by embracing a proxy war, which is about the strategic outsourcing of violence. They put themselves, in a position to embrace this violence from the outside adulterator, you know, the aristocrat that goes around fomenting trouble everywhere. But before this violence could be outsourced to the Ukrainian people or the Ukrainian nation, they had to be entrapped. Because it is only through that entrapment that it was possible for Ukraine to accept its subservience to an agency that it knows almost nothing about. You dig? These are very interesting aspects to consider, you know. You see, the entrapment of the Ukrainians was so stupendous. The entrapment of the Ukrainians was so spectacular that it has convinced many Ukrainian people of their invincibility. Yeah, I take it again. You see, the entrapment of the Ukrainian people was so spectacular that it has convinced many Ukrainians of their invincibility. Now, even when we all see what is happening there, the country is devastated. The country has been cut into two. The eastern Ukraine has been, sequestrated by the Russians. But the people themselves decided not to be part of Ukraine anymore. So the question that comes to mind is, what are the Ukrainian people going to do to retrieve this part of Ukraine, which harbors people that do not want anything to do with Ukraine anymore? So those are the kinds of questions that Volodymyr Zelensky and his people don't want to tell the world. That's the issue, you know. So I speak of this romance, this perverse romance between the beast of burden and the beast of prey. The beast of burden, the parvenu, the disconsolate parvenu, and the beast of prey, this aristocrat that I'm talking about, that I like to talk about. You see, the belligerent aristocrat. Now, the parvenu, you see, the parvenu wants to see itself as gaining the kind of moral authority, to rub shoulders with the aristocratic folk. So when it rubs shoulders with the aristocrats, it starts to think of itself as being in the league, in the aristocratic league, you know. But this is the problem that is happening over there. A beggarly parvenu, you see, just like many Ukrainians who I would call Arabists, they want to belong to, a certain group, the Europeans, whom they consider as, I don't know, they would say superior, or superior class of people to themselves. Well, you need to understand people. You need to immerse yourself in a community to be able to generate knowledge about that community. This is what you study in political ethnography, because people can be just critical of the Ukrainian people without really understanding the underlying dynamics of this problem. You know, what pushed these people, to embrace this proxy war from these aristocratic Westerners, you know, who sold them a dream. They bluffed the Ukrainians into embracing this proxy war. And after 2 years, 2 very bloody years of fighting against the Russians, you see, the aristocrats of the West, not all the Westerners, the political elites of the West, you see, they're trying to bluff their way out of this embarrassment because they're losing face. But the question is, how would they accept that they've been defeated in Ukraine without losing face? The evidence is there. They started off, they've sent so many weapons there in Ukraine. You know, they started off with the javelins, they went up with the HIMARS, you see, the Patriot missiles. Um, what is that? And then they came to the tanks. You see the Leopard tanks, the Abraham tanks. I think America said that I think in October, America confirmed, the US confirmed that I think 31 Abraham tanks were sent to Ukraine, that been delivered successfully to Ukraine. And then not just the Abraham tanks, they had also the Bradley tanks. The Bradley tanks were sent to Ukraine, you know, all this weaponry. You see, sophisticated weaponry that was sent there. Now they start talking about, you see, the Patriot missiles. I don't know if I already mentioned that. And then they went on to the F-16 fighter jets. All of this weaponry have been sent to Ukraine. Now you see the limits of military sophistication. Now you're fighting a proxy war against an unrelenting great power. You see, an unrelenting great power which has embraced this nation of great power recalcitrance, which is born, I have to emphasize, is born out of great power tyranny. Now, these aristocratic folks of the West, they're coming towards another great power, coming to the backyard of a great power, of an unrelenting great power. They want to defeat this great power in a military sense. They want to impose a very huge cost, a very huge burden. But this great power that is to be attacked, that is to be conquered, you see, has weighed the cost of this and decided that the cost of this, this war that is waged against the aristocrat of the West, that this cost is the cost that it deserves to have. So it has taken on this war with open arms. So the Ukrainians have been struggling ever since then. All of this sophisticated weaponry, the Bradleys, the HIMARS, the javelins, the F-16s, the Patriot missiles, the Leopard tanks, the Abraham tanks. You see, all of those things have not been able to defeat Russia. As far as we all know, Russia is still in control of the eastern part of Ukraine. But the reason is simple. The eastern part of Ukraine is located in the Russian sphere of influence. And it's not only that. The eastern part of Ukraine is populated largely by Russian-speaking people of Ukraine, who do not necessarily want to be considered as Ukrainians anymore. So these are some very interesting dynamics that have to be considered for anyone that is analyzing this problem, especially the Africans who like to just follow, they like to follow their followers. They don't sit down to think about things. They don't sit down to try to use their minds to reflect and contemplate on things. Now, the disconsolate parvenu, Volodymyr Zelensky, he went over a couple of days ago to the US to seek for more funds because the war is not going good. Not going good. I wrote in one short piece that I thought about the other day, suggesting that Zelensky should cut his losses. Sometimes it is the moral thing to do, to cut your losses and make peace, because peace has no price. Cut your losses. You cannot fight a war when you cannot support the war. Every general knows this. You see, it's very costly to get into war. Even if it's a very low intensity war, you need equipment to go to war. You need to take care of the soldiers, the combatants who are involved in soldiering. You need to take care of them. War is very costly. It's not just vicious, it's very costly. I'm talking of the material cost of war. How can you be fighting a war at the behest of someone that doesn't concern himself with your people? We are going to support Ukraine to the last Ukrainian. That is the word of the US and its allies, who are not necessarily the allies. These are chattels, you see, the European chattels or the American chattels of Europe. They kept on saying this thing, We are going to support Ukraine until the last Ukrainian. That's what you call in discourse analysis a hegemonic discourse. A hegemonic discourse. Now that discourse has been dislocated. You see, well, when we speak of dislocation in the discourse analysis, we're referring to a discourse, a hegemonic discourse, encountering events that it cannot control. In this case, in the case of Ukraine, you could see the events in Ukraine have made it such a way that the Americans can no longer support this. This is difficult. What is going on there is very difficult to contemplate. Now they've changed the discourse. I don't know if it's intentionally or if that was just a Freudian slip from President Biden the other day when Zelensky went to the US. He was making all his promises. Zelensky went there to ask for money. He went to ask for 60 billion US dollars support to fight the war, to continue fighting against Russians. Even after the failed counteroffensive that was highly hyped, you know, produced no fruits. So yes, he went there to seek for more funding, $60 billion. But finally, President Biden was very boldly and to a scornful extent, even, you know, telling Zelensky or telling the world that, well, they're going to give Ukraine $200 million. What is $200 million to fight against a great power like Russia? Hmm? So those are the things. So Zelensky went over there and he got $200 million. When he went there to ask or to request for $60 million. This is a business, you see, it's a business. They want to see results. The people that are supporting you, the people from whom you accepted this proxy war, want a return on investment. They don't see that. You've lost so many people. People are dying. The soldiers are dying in their numbers. We read about this article mentioning how Russia had lost, I think, 87% of the soldiers that it had, at the beginning of the war. Yeah, but that doesn't matter if it's the case. Well, you see, these are things people say. The Westerners always like to come up with these flamboyant stories. You see, even if that's the case, what is the result? What has become of that? Has the Ukrainians succeeded, to take back eastern Ukraine from Russia? Have they succeeded to push the Russian soldiers out of Ukraine? So those things are just those are things that people say to sell a story, to sell a dream, see, to people who are not willing to question things. Now they've changed the discourse from we are going to support Ukraine until the last Ukrainian. Like I said, that's a hegemonic discourse, which has encountered events that it cannot control. So, as I said, perhaps it's a Freudian slip, I don't know, from President Biden when he said that, we are going to support Ukraine for as long as we can. You see the difference? That's a new discourse now. We are going to support Ukraine for as long as we can. It started with, we are going to support Ukraine until the last Ukrainian for as long as it takes. That's what it said. Now we are going to support Ukraine for as long as we can. That's dislocation. If you ever wonder, it happens when a hegemonic discourse encounters events. I have to emphasize this: events that are ungovernable, events that are uncontrollable. It happens when things are not going well. You see, now you have to come up with new nodal points. They call them new nodal points, new things that are going to, channel the mind to a different direction. You see, that's exactly what is going on there. You're channeling the mind to a different direction. We are going to support Ukraine for as long as we can. You see, the aristocratic folk, the aristocratic elites They're basically telling this disconsolate parvenu that things are not going to be the same. They are trying to tell this parvenu the story without losing face. You see, they have no moral obligation to tell the parvenu the story as it is because they know that this is an unwinnable war. They try to talk of a stalemate. It is not a stalemate when your country has been cut into two. There's no stalemate there. You know, you can blow off the Kerch Bridge, but would you be able to take back eastern Ukraine? You see, the disconsolate parvenu, amid a fanfare of publicity, went over to the U.S. To ask for funding. And you had people like Chuck Schumer, yeah, these other guys, Lindsey Graham. Graham is having his own internal problems. Graham is claiming to support Ukraine, but he seems to have a problem with President Biden's. I don't know the way he's handling this war. He wants to go out and all out aggression, which is not even wise because they forgot who the opponent is. Hmm? It's Russia they're talking about, not Libya. They seem to forget all those things. Now, the parvenu, Zelensky, you know, came back with backstabbing scorn, from the US. That is backstabbing scorn from the US. Yeah, because he cannot believe himself that what he heard or what he saw, you know, those are things that you have to think about before you get involved with things that are going to prove very costly for your people and your country. Now, Ukraine is totally devastated. You know, Professor Meshheimer was always talking about, wrecking Ukraine. I think it's more than just wrecking Ukraine, you know, it's returning Ukraine to the boiling oceans of molten rock. The boiling oceans of molten rock. How do you build a nation from that? The nation has to rise out of that ocean of molten rock. What kind of nation is going to rise out of that nation of molten rock? That ocean of molten rock. That's exactly what is going on. When the HIMARS, the javelins, the Leopard tanks, the Abraham tanks, the Bradleys, the Patriot missiles, when all of these things have failed, what else can be done? When thousands of soldiers have been murdered, and you can tell us Lisa Graham and his gang of impervious ideologues are claiming that America or the US has been able to support Ukraine without the loss of a single American life. That's what it's saying. Now, when all of this sophisticated weaponry has been sent to Ukraine, what else needs to be done? There's only one thing that needs to be done to satisfy Lindsey Graham and people like him, Chuck Schumer, and others. You have to send American soldiers to Ukraine. American soldiers have to go to Ukraine. And that is what President Biden was saying, that direct confrontation between the US and Russia is World War III. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of World War III? Since you don't want peace, since you don't want to talk about peace, you only want to talk about confrontation, since you don't see any moral value in building peace with the enemy, with someone that you despise, what makes you afraid of a third world war? Because that is where we're heading to. That is where we are headed. You see all these great men, the great politicians of the US, the aristocrats. You begin to wonder, how do these people get elected? You elect somebody that promises to bring joy, to bring happiness in your community. But you see that the level of poverty on the streets of the US is unimaginable. You see, from California to Philadelphia, you know, to New York. See, homelessness in America, powerlessness, despondency, dereliction in the streets of the US. But these are people that can afford. This is a country that can afford, you see, to send all this money to sponsor a war which they know that is unwinnable. This is a country that is 34 billion, oh, sorry, 34 trillion dollars in debt. The US is 34 trillion dollars is debt. As we understand, they themselves say these things. Where do you get the money to fight wars? America should be the leader of the world. If they want to be the leader, they should be the leader of the world. Now, since President Biden came to power, it has been extremely bloody. 4 years, it's only wars. He came to power. First thing he did, America withdrew their soldiers from Afghanistan after a staggering 2 decades. You see, 2 decades of war. They returned with a debacle. Now they are witnessing a debacle in Ukraine, which promises to be a much bigger debacle. They're scared to go there. Now, in a situation where great powers have sheltered themselves comfortably under the canopy of nuclear power, what is going to make the difference? If you say that you have nuclear power and it's great powers, you're not allowed or you're not supposed to use that nuclear power. So, what is going to be the difference if you engage another great power in a war? I don't really know if Lindsey Graham and Chuck Schumer and the rest of these guys of this gang of imperious ideologues, I don't even know if they ever consider this side of things. You know? Now, this distressing poverty of sanity that people would see failure in their eyes. You see, they will see a debacle in the making, and they're still talking about supporting Ukraine for as long as we can. For as long as we can. That's an acceptance of defeat for as long as we can. What makes you move away from supporting Ukraine, no matter what it takes? What makes you go from there? And now you're talking about for as long as we can. You know, when I think of these things, you see, I think of Philadelphia. You know, I think of Skid Row. Yeah, I've written about these things, about the level of poverty, the level of despondency in the US, you know, and people listen to this thing, they listen to their own politicians, their senators talking about sending all this money to sponsor wars that do not benefit the people that are sleeping on the streets of the US. The level of drug addiction in the US itself is something. They talk about the border, the problem in the border down south. You know, it is like a country that has lost its moral compass. How do you win a war against Russia in the Russian sphere of influence? Not just that sphere of influence, right at Russia's backyard. How do you defeat Russia there? Russia can never be defeated in Ukraine. I've written about this. You see, the Russians are going to trap Ukraine into the furnace of Ukraine. They're going to trap the US and NATO and the EU into the blazing Ukrainian furnace and transform Ukraine into an adulterated cemetery deep in the bowels of Eurasia. That is what's going to happen. This is not a war they can win. You know, it's so sad. You see, it's a sorrowful absurdity when you see people who can understand. You see, the problem now in the world is that people don't read anymore. It's like Africans who don't like to read, who read only when they have to pass exams. The Europeans do not read anymore. You know, the people who constructed this, who conceptualized, who conceived this notion of the Westerners or Western domination, you see, or Western oppression of the world, these people are not there anymore. The Europeans of today or the Americans, they can't deal with these things anymore. You see how many, you see they're making some very silly mistakes, you know, you begin to wonder, do these people think about these things? Do they weigh the pros and cons of these things? You know, you want to go and fight. It's like Francis Ngannou fighting against Stipe Miocic. Miocic, I think he gave Francis Ngannou a punch. The first thing is he noticed that Ngannou has a chin, you know, and then he gave him one punch, and then Ngannou staggered and he moved behind a bit. Oh, he thought that was the opportunity for him to go and finish it. So he rushed there, he rushed into Ngannou, and then he got caught with a hook. He got caught with a hook and he was dropped. That's exactly what is happening between the US and Russia. The US thought that Russia was on the ropes, so they tried to go and finish it. You could see even when Ursula von der Leyen was talking about depriving Russia of a prosperous future, that the sanctions that the EU was, pronouncing, that she was pronouncing all the sanctions with the hope that these sanctions were going to deprive Russia of a prosperous future. These are our own words. Those were just boastful rodomontades. What if the Russians wanted something else? What if the Russians wanted a dependable future for their people, for their children, a future where no country is going to come around their borders to terrorize them or to try to defeat them, to try to conquer them? As far as we know, the Russians are still in Russia. The Russians are fighting in Ukraine, which is India's sphere of influence. The Russians have not gone into Western Europe. The Russians have not gone into Germany. You see, the Russians occupied Germany in the aftermath of the Second World War alongside the US, France, and Britain. But amongst these four countries that were the Allied powers, the only country that is still occupying Germany today is the US, which has a military base with about 30 to 35,000 soldiers stationed in Germany. So the Germans themselves are caught in a real quandary. They're caught in a fascinating moral dilemma. You see, we've been having all these discussions in the political science between realism, the realist school of thought, and the liberal institutionalist school of thought, in the sense that they're saying that, the liberal institutionalist school of thought is saying that states that are involved in business, business dealings, do not go to war. But the war in Ukraine has disproven this, you know. Yeah, because Germany and Russia were deep inside, they were deeply interwoven, tightly interwoven in these business ties. You see, the Nord Stream pipeline that was blown off, you see, connecting Russia to Germany, you know, the Russians were supplying gas to Germany. See, that gas was actually helping the Germans to run their economy, their production and all that. But that did not preclude that pipeline to be bombed and destroyed. They're saying that is the Americans are behind it. People like Seymour Hersh, that's what he's stating, that the Americans were behind the bombing, you know. And if that's the case, then the Germans probably know about that. So it's like the Germans the Germans bit the finger that fed them. So the Germans are caught in a moral dilemma. Now, I think I read earlier today that the Germans are saying that if everything else fails, if other nations refuse to supply aid to Ukraine, military aid to Ukraine, the Germans are going to declare a state of emergency. They're going to declare an emergency that will permit the government to continue supporting Ukraine next year. That's 2024. Now, these are the things. Now, you're caught in a spiral of disillusionment, so much so that you don't know what to do to stop yourself. It's like a drug addict. It's like drug addiction. You continue in that self-destruction until there can be some type of intervention. In this case, it's going to be some type of cosmic intervention. You're spending all this money, but you know that this money is lost money. You're claiming that you're going to seize Russian assets, but you see, sanctions are always a double-edged sword, especially if you're dealing with a great power which has the capacity, to do some reprisal action of its own. If you take the Russian money, the Russian assets that were seized, you see, and you can use it as you want to support the war in Ukraine. If you cannot sponsor the war, you're using Russian money, the interest that have accrued on that money, on the assets, you want to use it to support Ukraine. The Russians can do some reprisal action of their own. So it's tit for tat. You see, all these things you're doing, you see, are not seeming to work. When all else fails, what else is there to be done? You have to come to the table to talk about peace. You dig? You have to come to the table to talk about concessions. And I advised one Ukrainian the other day, I said, look, don't wait till you lose everything. Because the more you lose, the less your chances to gain much when it comes to cooperation between yourself, your country, and Russia. You lose the bargaining power the more you lose in the war. Don't wait till you're defeated. Don't wait till you lose in the war. Don't wait till you're conquered, because you're going to lose your bargaining power in a very significant way. That's it. And not if these aristocrats will not be able to help you, because you can already see the level of backstabbing scorn that you're being treated with. You can show your people that you're rubbing shoulders with the aristocratic, the hegemonic aristocrats. You can show your people, you can be boastful about that. You see, but at the end of the day, the people are suffering. The people have been massacred. Your compatriots have been massacred with impunity. Unspeakable level of brutality that has been meted out on your people. You can claim that the Russians have been killed. You can claim that 87% of Russians who started the war have been killed. You can claim that 10,000 Russian tanks have been destroyed, but the Russians are still in the position of command as regards this war in Ukraine. The Russians are dug in. You felt their power. You felt their resolve. This is what I'm speaking about. When great powers, restfully shelter themselves under the canopy of nuclear power, the only thing that is going to make the difference is what I've written about, what I've come to describe as cosmic resolve. This transcends, you see, the boundaries of military sophistication. This is a thing that makes soldiers to fight and die even if they know that they cannot win, because they're fighting for something that is bigger than themselves. Now, between the Russians and the Ukrainians, who are a broken nation, who has more resolve? You're telling the Russians that you want to defeat them. You're telling the Russians that you want to split their country. You want to dismember Russia. You make these people know. You made your intentions clear. Normally, intentions are not made clear. Capabilities are known. You see, capabilities are known, but intentions are always obscure. But the Westerners, the aristocratic elites of the West, made their intentions known right from the start, that they were going to defeat Russia. They were going to, in the words of the American Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, he said they were going to weaken Russia. That is what he said. You see, you want to weaken Russia, you want to fight against your opponent, and you're telling him that, or telling the opponent that you're going to weaken that opponent, and you're going to use somebody else to help you to weaken that opponent, and you're going to do so for as long as it takes.